مين له أي سؤال؟ بلال لك أي سؤال؟ عمر، محمد، مهند، في أي سؤال؟
تمام دكتور روان.
طيب نشوف العدد مش كتير كويس، 36 و 27 واحد الواحد لسه الحاضرين، 28 صاروا. إذا احنا اللاست تايم كنا بنحكي عن ميتابوليزم اوف ماسل، وحكينا عن مصادر الطاقة. إذا بنتذكر حكينا there are three sources of energy. السورس اوف انرجي أول شيء هاي هون، السورس اوف انرجي أول وحدة ال ATP. ال ATP هون، وال ATP storage in the form of creatine phosphate. بعدين حكينا عن الانيروبيك glycolysis. بيكون الانيروبيك glycolysis this is little bit fast but does not supply with energy too much. Glucose to ATP will most important oxidative phosphorylation, but this is very slow and this is used for marathon player. فحكينا انه ال ATP when it use it more than 70 to 80% is dissipated as heat, والefficiency is very low. وكمان طبعا بكون عندنا CO2 water، ممكن CO2، وبعدين بكون عندنا لاكتيك اسيد، واللاكتيك اسيد ممكن يسوي لنا ماسل كرامس، يعني توجع العضلات. ليش بصير ماسل فتيج؟ ليش بصير تعب العضله؟ تعب العضله ممكن يكون ما في انرجي، ما في كالسيوم enough from SR، ما في نيورو ترانسميتر، ما في اكسجين، وبيلد اب اوف لاكتيك اسيد اند اي دي بي، اللاكتيك اسيد اللي بيساوي المصل كرامز. فاجينا هون حكينا عن الاكسجين ديبت، قلنا حد لما يخلص الواحد الاكسرسايز بتلاقيه بتنفس بسرعه لسه، مع انه ما بيعمل اكسرسايز، واقف خلص بتنفس بسرعه عشان ياخذ كميه من الاكسجين يسد فيها the amount of oxygen it is lacking for him. يعني the amount of oxygen it is lacking because of anaerobic glycolysis. So this is called oxygen debt. يعني لو شفنا الاكسجين بكون هيك مثلا، هاي الاكسرسايز وهاي ال O2 consumption والاكسرسايز مثلا بدا من هون. The exercise started from here to here. الاكسجين consumption بيكون هيك عادي، بيزيد الاكسجين consumption هيك، وبعد الاكسرسايز بضله شوية زايد هيك، بعدين بنزل للريستنج. فthis extra oxygen that is used after the exercise we call it oxygen debt or debt. Sometimes the B is not pronounced. So this added oxygen is used to restore muscle cells to the resting level in three ways: to convert lactic acid into glycogen, to synthesize creatine phosphate and ATP, and to replace the oxygen removed from myoglobin. Then these are the three ways for this oxygen is used عشان نحول اللاكتيك اسيد للجلايكوجين، لانه الاصل الجلايكوليسيس اللي هون. بس الجلايكوليسيس زي ما احنا شايفين هون مصل جلايكوجين، شو بتحول للاكتيك اسيد. فهاو you can convert lactic acid back into glycogen? You need oxygen, you need ATP. So this ATP is used from the muscle death, and also to restore the ATP that's finished, and to synthesize, to convert, to replace the oxygen that is removed from myoglobin. Myoglobin is oxygen carrying molecule in the muscle. The tension, the rate at which nerve impulse the tension، وإذا وصلنا شيء اسمه muscle twitch، يعني النبضة العضلية، on الفورس، on التايم. هذا لما يصير when there is stimulus here، أي هون الستيمولس. There is some time that before the muscle contracts, but the muscle will contract, then relax. So this is contraction phase. And this is relaxation phase. انتبه هون، هذا this is mechanical، ما له علاقة بالأكشن potential. relaxation phase. الأكشن potential وين بيحصل؟ الأكشن potential is very short. هون بيحصل هاي الأكشن potential. هذا أكشن potential بعده بيحصل. هاي الفترة، this small period between this small period، هاي between the stimulus and the start of contraction is called latent period. هاي الفترة بتاخد لها الكونتراكشن relaxation between 50 to 100 millisecond. الاكشن بوتنشال بياخد 1، بياخد ماكسيمم ممكن ياخد 10 millisecond. اذا احنا ممكن نعطي we can give more action potentials. احنا بنعرف بعد الابسوليوت هون action potential، action potential، action potential. Every action potential will be followed by contraction. ممكن if this rate of impulses action potential rate is too fast، ممكن المصل هون يضله contracted، يضله continuous contraction. الcontinuous contraction we call it tetanus، القزاز. إذا بتلاحظ إنه مثلا لعيبة كرة القدم the football player they might have muscle tension، muscle cramps، muscle tension أو spasm، muscle spasm here. يعني عضلتهم بتضلها إيش؟ مقلصة. فthis might occur if the action potential is too frequent. ليش؟ لأنه صار إيش هون؟ صار summation of the force. وين صار السميشن؟ during contraction phase. So here the tension of force muscle contraction varies. Maximum tension is dependent on the rate at which the nerve impulse living with the amount of tension before contraction. وهذا اللي حكينا اسمه فرانك ستارلينج، اللي هو كل ما كان اللينث اكثر بكون التنشن اكثر. whenever the length is more, the tension is more. Depends on the nutrients and oxygen availability. If there is no oxygen and nutrient, معناته there might be, if no nutrient أو oxygen، شو ممكن يحصل؟ ممكن يحصل fatigue. And the size of the motor unit. شو الموتور يونت إذا بنتذكر؟ الموتور يونت هاي الموتور نيورون plus all the fibers it supplies. هدول بنسميه موتور يونت. إذا كانت الموتور يونت small نتوقع the force. If the motor unit is small, the force is less. If the motor unit is big, the force is big. This is motor unit, consists of motor neuron and the muscle fiber stimulates the axomotor branches. Muscle control of precise movement consists of many small motor units. Muscles that control voice. كل ما كان الموتور unit smaller كل ما كان الموفمنت more precise movement. وكل ما كانت whenever the motor units are more, the movement is less precise. The muscle that control the voice 2 to 3, muscle fibers per motor units, muscle controlling eye movements 10 to 10, muscle that controlling eye, leg and arm 100. The total strength of the motor of contraction depends on the size of motor units and the number that are activated. all or none principle motor units اما بصير فيها اكشن potential او بصيرش. اذا بما انه حكينا whenever there is action potential on the neuromuscular junction there is acetylcholine and the acetylcholine is enough to cause contraction. Then whenever there is stimulus of the motor units are stimulated, it's going to cause contraction. بس لازم نوصل للstimulus توصل للthreshold for the motor units. Then all or none principle of muscle contraction. بما انه too many motor units, every motor units have its own threshold. When the individual muscle fiber stimulated, depolarization and action potential propagated along the scar, it must contract to its full force. ما في تقول partially contracted. Also, when the single muscle unit is recruited to contraction, all the muscle fibers in the motor unit must all contract. كل المسل fibers they must contract at the same time. هاي موتور يونتس. شوف هون هاي الأخضر هاي هون شوف الأخضر كم هاي muscle fiber وهاي muscle fiber وهاي muscle fiber. So this green motor units has 3 muscle fibers. This violet motor units has 2 muscle fibers, high 1 and 2. So if you stimulate this neuron only the threshold for the green, you will get the force more than if you stimulate only the violet. If you stimulate both of them, we will have summation of motor units. If you have the stimulus, that's enough to stimulate both. And this is called recruitment. Recruitment زي تجنيد. Recruitment of motor units. So what is important here, and if you want to increase the tension, if you want to increase the force, you can recruit muscle units. How you can recruit them? By stimulating both motor units. يعني the stimulus has to be above the threshold for both motor units. Twitch contraction زي ما حكينا. هلا latent period here is, this is the latent period. This is small period between the stimulus, here the stimulus here, and the contraction, the start from this code. This is contraction phase, and this might last, the contraction might last between 50 to 100 milliseconds. The action potential occurs here. If there is too many action potential, they will summate, and the summation might come during relaxation, contraction at tetanus. If you have action potentials too far from each other, مثلا action potential هون وaction potential هون وaction potential هون, they might summate, but during relaxation بصير هيك, هاي summation هون, بعدين بيجي another summation here, بعدين another summation here. So this is summation during relaxation, and the first is summation during contraction. When you summate during contraction, you increase the force of contraction. Then here twitch, we have twitch lasts between 220 to 200 milliseconds. في latent period, a brief delay between, highly brief delay latent period عشان action potential to stimulate calcium release, and then calcium binds to troponin C. بعد البايندينج بيعمل uncovering the actin binding sites, then the actin binds to myosin, forming actomyosin. Then there is power stroke. Power stroke is movement of the actomyosin inside, من هون or inside من هون, shortening. Contraction period 110 to 100. That's calcium binding, troponin, myosin binding, cross bridge formation, اللي هي binding of myosin and actin. Relaxation period اللي هي movement of the calcium back to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. By what? By calcium pump or calcium ATPase. And this detachment means ATP. Refractory, when a muscle fiber contracts, it cannot respond to another action potential. المهم هون refraction action potential. Skeletal muscle has a refractory period of 5 milliseconds. Cardiac muscle has a refractory period. This is the refractory period for the action potential, not for the muscle contraction. Muscle contraction ما إله refractory. Muscle contraction or muscle relaxation does not have refractory. The refractory for the action potential. Here you might have action potential here. Action potential here. You see summation. If the action potential is too close, they might summate, and if they summate, they increase force. If the frequency of action potential is too close to each other, you might have summation. You can have what we call it incomplete tetanus. And if the frequency of action potential is too much, you might get complete tetanus. And complete tetanus might end with fatigue of muscle. So this is single twitch. This is wave summation. This is unfused tetanus or incomplete. and this is fused tetanus or complete. You can have summation by adding motor units. What is muscle tone? Every muscle has minimal force of contraction, minimal, without stimulation during relaxation. Why? لأنه here in the neuromuscular junction here, and here the muscle هون في acetylcholine بيطلع. Always there is some kind of acetylcholine that is secreted, and this is causing the muscle tone. So the muscle tone is due to the stimulation. That's a small amount of tension. The muscle, small amount, minimal amount of tension. Due to weak contraction, motor units, small grooves of motor units are alternatively active and inactive, constantly shifting between. Muscle tone is kept the muscle firm. The muscle tone, this is what differentiates paralyzed. Paralyzed يعني ايش؟ paralyzed muscle no tone، ما في muscle tone. normal muscle resting muscle there is muscle tone. So this will differentiate paralyzed muscle from resting muscle. There are two types of contraction. One is called isotonic. Isotonic, no change in tension. ما في change in force. Change in length. Shortening. If you carry a 10 kilogram from the ground and you carry them up, the tension is the same. Tension is 10 kilogram اللي you carry them. أو أنت حملت كتاب. If you carry a book from down the ground upward, ما في حمولة كتير، الحمولة نفسها. بس إيش تغير؟ تغير طول المصل، length of muscle. في shortening muscle is called isotonic. Isometric, no change in tension, no change in length. ما في تغير باللينث. Change in tension. If you want to press on the wall، تضغط على الحيط، بدك تضغط ما راح يصير shortening of the muscle، بس راح يصير increase in the force. So the tension level remains constant. Tension remains constant while the muscle change in length. Used for body movement, for moving objects, picking a book up. Tension generally is not enough for the object to move, and the muscle does not change in length. It does not change in length. اللي طوله مش يعني the length of the muscle is not changed, but there is shortening of the sarcomere. بس الساركومير انت كأنك بتكبس المصل من هون بتثبت طوله and you shortening. شو بده يسحب المصل؟ بده يسحب زي ما حكينا التايتنز، بده يسحب اللي هدول السيريز الاستيك اليمنت، بده يسحب الالاستيك اليمنتس، بده يسحب مش الساركومير. الساركومير بيصير شورتنينج، بس اذا احنا تذكرنا بالساركومير هاي هون الثيك فيلامنتس موصوله مين؟ التايتنز هدول. فهون الساركومير بده يكسر، بس التايتنز اللي بتنشد، مش الهالدنج بوك يوزنج ان outstretched arm، او تدفع حيط، او تعمل زي حمل اثقال. حمل اثقال بتزيد الثقل بس الشورتنج ما بيصير. skeletal muscle. هلا احنا types of skeletal muscle. في muscles that might fatigue easily. وفي muscle resist fatigue. What fatigues easily are anaerobic muscles. What does not fatigue are aerobic. And this, what resists fatigue, are called red muscle. What fatigue easily are called white. White because it has very less capillaries, less myoglobin, red muscles. So this is skeletal muscle fibers are not alike. Red appearance, red muscle fibers. Why they look like red? They have high myoglobin and more mitochondria. بما انه they have more mitochondria معناته there is source of ATP there, more energy stores and greater blood supply. That's why they look red. And these red muscles, they resist fatigue. White muscles, they lack mitochondria or myoglobin and blood supply. That's why they fatigue easily. هلا هون كمان بنسميهم اسماء ثانيه slow oxidative fibers. هاي الريد slow oxidative لانه they use the mitochondria. So they resist fatigue. They have too much blood vessels. They have too much myoglobin. They have too much mitochondria. Fast oxidative glycolytic. Fast oxidative glycolytic. This is in between the white here and the red here. Fast oxidative are intermediate between in size and appearance between the dark and red. They moderately resist fatigue, not like the first one, used for walking. Glycolytic, which is anaerobic. Anaerobic activity, short duration. They can fatigue easily. So you can divide the muscle into slow oxidative, fast oxidative glycolytic, and fast glycolytic, and accordingly no fatigue in the slow, moderately fatigue, and fatigue in the fast glycolytic. Muscle fibers, can they convert? Yes, they can be converted from one to another fiber by training. Most muscle fiber are a mixture of three. About half of the fiber in typical skeletal. Within particular motor units, all skeletal muscle fiber are the same. The different motor units in the smell are recruited in a specific order depending on the task behind fast aerobic activity for maximal force, fast and aerobic. There is conversion between the slow and fast, conversion depending on the training. Distribution and recruitment, different motor fibers. Most muscle are a mixture of 3 types. Proportions vary depending on the action of the muscle. Postural muscle مثلا دول تبعون الوقوف, mostly they are slow oxidative لأنه you use them too much. Muscles for the shoulder and arms, they are fast glycolytic, and leg muscles, they have large muscle, both slow and fast oxidative glycolytic muscles. Can we convert from one type to the other type? Can we convert from white to red? Yes, but it needs training. It needs training. Exercise skeletal muscle ratio, fast glycolytic and slow. It depends on the ratio of fast glycolytic and slow. Exercise بنعرف الجلايكوليتيك for say ممكن يكون 400 meters, والسلو for marathon runner. So it depends on the ratio of these glycolytic to the slow oxidative that individual can exercise. Individuals with higher proportion of fast, هدول they excel in intense activity, weightlifting and sprinting. Individuals with higher proportion of slow oxidative, they endorse activities, running, distance, long running, اللي هي marathon. On weightlifting اللي هي isometric exercise. On isotonic exercise. So it depends on the proportion of the muscle, which muscle you are. Have various types of exercise can change, can induce changes. Exercise or training can induce changes in the muscle fiber. Aerobic exercise transforms some fast into fast glycolytic. Endurance exercise do not increase the muscle mass. Endurance exercises that require short bursts of strength produce increase in the fast. And it depends on the type of training. The one that reduce short burst of strength produce increase يعني زي اللي هي 100 meters running. يصير fast glycolytic. واللي aerobic exercise بتحول الفاست glycolytic into fast oxidative glycolytic. Muscle cells, they don't regenerate. Muscle cells, they don't regenerate. Usually the increase in muscle mass is due to hypertrophy of muscle. يعني the muscle cells get thicker. Why get thicker? بصير فيهم increased synthesis of thin and thick filaments. Increase contractile proteins number, contractile proteins. Exercise induced damage. ممكن exercise إذا كان too heavy exercise, it will disturb the Z disc, it will disturb the sarcomere. Then after intense exercise, electromicrogravity considerable muscle damage, including torn sarcolemmas ممكن. This is the scale plasma cells muscle and may disturb this D disc. Blood levels of proteins. في الحالة هاي you measure blood levels of protein and measure the enzyme creatine kinase enzyme. وهذه مثلا في الهارت راح نحكي عنها heart ischemia. Ischemia معناته decrease blood supply. هذول في الحالات هون بنوجد انه increase troponin which is contractile protein due to damage and increase CBK creatine phosphokinase activity enzyme creatine phosphokinase activity increase myoglobin increase in the troponin I. سبازم وكرامز. شو معنى سبازم؟ سبازم حكينا ممكن يكون sudden involuntary contraction، ممكن يكون tetanus، وممكن يكون just small أو short kind of contraction usually painless بيكون. cramps pain and the cramps usually is due to accumulation of lactic acid. Lactic acid, overuse of the muscle, injury, abnormal blood and electrolyte levels. Abnormal electrolyte levels. طيب خلصنا هيك المصل. له أي سؤال على المصل؟ أي سؤال على المصل لحد هون مطلوب في الامتحان. الامتحان للدكتورة تمارا في 14 سؤال بلد، ولا النيرفان ماسل والانترودكشن في 26 سؤال. الانترودكشن اللي بدينا فيها، النيرفان ماسل في 26 سؤال. في اي سؤال؟
كم مدة الامتحان دكتور؟
مدة الامتحان بنعطي عادة دقيقة ونصف لكل سؤال. 40 سؤال ساعة، ساعتين 60 دقيقة. ماشي؟ ديروا بالكم على الكاميرات. بدك تفتح الكاميرا، ما فتحش الكاميرا راح عليك الامتحان. او اللي متغلب ومش شايف حاله انه there is no way الانترنت تقطع او شيء، ممكن يجي على الكلية. مش على الكلية، يعني على مختبرات التأهيل عادة الامتحان يحدث. طيب إذا ما في سؤال خليني أحكي عن الكارديو فاسكولار سيستم. من اسمه كارديو وفاسكولار. إذا لما حكينا في البداية بالسيستمز حكينا في سي في اس كارديو فيسلز، وهذا من أول السيستمز اللي تكونوا في الجسم. وحكينا شو الفيسلز؟ الفيسلز قنوات شانلز، these are the vessels. والكاردياك الهارت البمب. So the cardiovascular system consists of two parts. The cardiac part, heart, and vessels, the vascular part. هاي الكارديوفاسكولار part. This is the heart. And these are the vessels. Let's just talk about the vessel first, then we will come to them later, and then start the heart. The vessels, the main vessels are either arteries or veins. ما في. شو معنى arteries؟ Arteries they take the blood away from the heart. And veins they bring the blood toward the heart. ما في إشي تقول لي هذا oxygenated ودي oxygenated. يعني ممكن الفينز the veins might contain oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. So it doesn't matter what type of blood they carry. If they bring the blood toward the heart, we call it vein. If they take the blood away from the heart, we call it arteries, whether it is oxygenated blood inside it or deoxygenated. طيب هاي الارترز والفين. لو جينا للارترز المين arteries that go away from the heart في عندنا هون الأورتيك arch aorta. aortic arch بعدين بنقسم منه vessels اللي بنيجيهم، وبعدين الاورتيك arch this is the largest artery، وبنقسم it divides into small greater artery small artery medium size and so on. آخر شيء بالسيستم إذا هون من aorta large artery medium sized بعدين small artery بعدين تصغير arteriole بعد الارتريول capillaries زي ما احنا شايفين. هاي الاورتا سمول ارتري، هاي capillaries stomach بنكرياس ليفر جي اي، هاد capillaries. بعدين بعد الكابيلاريز بيتجمعوا بيسووا فينيولز تصغير فينز، بعدين سمول فينز بيتجمعوا، بعدين medium size veins large veins. بالاخير the two important veins that bring the blood toward the heart هون in the right side are the inferior vena cava هون and the superior vena cava here, superior vena cava. They bring the blood toward the right side of the heart. Now the circulation, there are two circulation. في عنا systemic circulation في عنا pulmonary circulation. Pulmonary circulation takes from the heart to the lungs and back from the lungs to the heart through the pulmonary veins. إذا بيطلع pulmonary circulation. Because the pulmonary circulation does not circulate that long, we call it lesser circulation. And because the systemic circulation goes almost everywhere, we call it greater circulation. So we have greater circulation. نشوف هون الفيسلز لسه هون that come away. الهارت نيجي بعدين. This is the vessels and this is the aorta. في عندنا right left subclavian نزود upper limbs left common carotid head and brain بعدين brachiocephalic. البريكيوسيفاليك طوالي بينقسم إلى right subclavian و right common carotid. right subclavian و common carotid. هاي الأورطة. بعدين بيطلع من الرايت سايد بيطلع pulmonary artery بروح لللنج. هاي pulmonary artery بروح لللنج left and right، وبعدين بيجوا from the lung to the heart through the pulmonary veins. As you see, the pulmonary veins, they carry oxygenated blood and the pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood. بعدين الأورطة بلف هيك بالchest بصير اسمه thoracic aorta. بعدين بنزل diaphragm تحت الديافراغم هون اسمه abdominal aorta. لو طلعنا عليه بصورة أوضح هيك. بعدين هون this is the superior vena cava that brings the blood toward the right heart from the head, from the upper part of the body, and this is the inferior vena cava that brings the blood from the lower part of the body. هاي هون شوف كيف هون الليفت subclavian left common carotid left subclavian brachiocephalic that divides into right common carotid and right subclavian. This is the superior vena cava, this is the inferior vena cava. These are the pulmonary arteries, and these are the pulmonary veins. That comes to this. This is an anterior view. If we look to a posterior view of the heart, these are the pulmonary veins. They come from the lungs. And this is the aortic arch عامل هيك قوس وراجع هون على الchest وبعدين نازل من الchest على الابدومن. هنا this is the inferior vena cava and this is the superior vena cava رايحين على السايد right side. This is the brachiocephalic اللي رايح عامل right. اللي عامل هون left subclavian و left common carotid brachiocephalic العامل right subclavian و right common carotid. This is posterior view of the heart. هلا between, if we come to the heart, this is, if you open the heart, we finished from this, we're going to talk about, if you open the heart, there are two upper chambers, two upper chambers, we call them جمع أتريا, أتريا, جمع atrium. This is the right atrium and this is the left atrium. Right atrium بيجي superior vena cava و inferior vena cava. And the left atrium بيجي من pulmonary arteries, pulmonary veins. هلا between the left atrium and right atrium there is interatrial septum. Interatrial. يفصلهم, they are not continuous. Now between the right atrium and right ventricle there is a valve called A3o Ventricular Valve. And this valve has three cusps. That's why it's called sometimes tricuspid valve. On the left side, what separates the left atrium from the left ventricle, there is a valve that has two cusps. That's why it's called bicuspid valve. And the bicuspid valve sometimes called mitral valve. Mitral valve الصمام التاجي. There is in between the left ventricle and right ventricle there is septum called interventricular septum, which is a muscle and it continues with the muscles of the ventricles. Now, at the edges of the valve here, at the edges of the valve here, these valves are supported by chordae tendineae, tendinous structure, tendons. And these chordae tendineae are inserted in a muscle called papillary muscles. العضلات الحلمية, because they look like papillae. So the chordae tendineae, they are inserted in the papillary muscles and they are attached to the sides of the valve. Now the valve also from the left atrium, from the left ventricle, there is a valve that separates the left ventricle from the aorta, and there is another valve that separates the right ventricle from the pulmonary artery. These valves are called semilunar valves. Semilunar, شبه هلالية. We have aortic and pulmonary semilunar valve. Now, what is the importance of these valves? The importance of these valves is to direct the movement of blood to be one-way direction. One-way direction of movement. Then has to be one-way direction. Then the valves, the AV valves, AV, open toward ventricles. The ventricles are the pouches that are present in the downward. يعني حكينا في 4 chambers. 4 chambers. Upper chambers are called atria and lower chamber called ventricles. So AV valves are towards the ventricle. Semilunar valve open toward arteries. From the ventricle toward arteries, and the aortic valve opens toward the aorta, and the pulmonary valves open toward the pulmonary. Now, opening these valves open or close passively according to the pressure gradient. So these valves, they open or close passively, not because of contraction. نيجيهم هون. Where the heart lies? The heart lies in the mediastinum, بالنص chest, mediastinum. This is the anatomical region. This is the heart. This is called mediastinum. And around it is the lungs, من هون, and this is the right and left lungs. Left and right lungs. This is transverse section of thoracic cavity showing the heart in the mediastinum. These are the valves. This is bicuspid valve. And this is tricuspid valve. And this is tricuspid or AV on the right side, right AV. And this is bicuspid left AV. Now these are the semilunar valves, aortic semilunar valve and pulmonary semilunar valve. Now these valves are open or close passively according to the pressure gradient. So these valves, they open or close passively according to the pressure gradient. Pressure gradient. With the pressure in the atria is more than the pressure in the ventricle, the valves open. When the pressure in the ventricle is more than the pressure in the atria, the AV valve closes. When the pressure in the ventricle is more than the pressure in the aorta بحالة الليفت and the pressure in the pulmonary artery in the case of the right, the semilunar valve open. When the pressure in the aorta is more than the pressure in the left ventricle in case of the left, or the pressure in the pulmonary artery is more than the pressure in the right ventricle in case of the right, these semilunar valve, they close. This semilunar valve, they close. So these are the valves. It's very important how they open, how they close. We will come to that when we talk about the cycle. These are the chordae tendini. So this is the importance of the chordae tendini. This is the chordae tendini. The chordae tendini, when the muscle, when the ventricles contract, the papillary muscle is the part of the ventricle. So the chordae tendini are pulled, they pull the AV valve down to the ventricle. They prevent what we call it valve prolapse. So they prevent valve prolapse, these chordae tendini. So this is very important. Now, otherwise, if there's no chordae tendini, because of the highest pressure in the ventricle, the valve might open toward the atria, and this is what we call it valve incompetence. If the valve does not close properly, you will have valve incompetence, and you will have blood regurgitate, يعني يعود إلى from the ventricle to the regurgitation, and this is too bad. So the chordae tendini are very important. They are attached to the papillary muscles. So if sometimes the papillary muscles are infarcted and صار فيهم جلطة مثلا, the chordae tendini, they are non-functional, and you will have incompetence of the valve. You will have regurgitation of blood from the ventricles to the atria, and this is abnormal, of course. This is the when the muscle, papillary muscle relax. The chordae tendini are relaxed here, and the AV valve is open. Mitral valve is open. Mitral valve is open. And the pressure in the atria here, in this case, pressure in the atria is more than the pressure in the ventricle, and the AV valve opens. Now the muscle layers. Well, if we take part of the heart wall here, this is the heart. The heart wall consists of 3 layers. Anything بننسبه للهارت بنسميه endocardium, epithelial layer. Myocardium, this is the major cardiac muscle, myocardium. And the last layer is called pericardium. Pericardium. The pericardium has 2 areas, 2 layers. One very close to the myocardium, we call it visceral myocardium, pericardium. And the other layers outside, we call it parietal myocardium. And in between there is pericardial space, pericardial space or pericardial cavity. And this cavity usually holds a little bit, maybe up to 50 ml of fluid. And this fluid, like the fluid any around any tissue, it is as shock absorber, prevent or it protects against damage, protects against damage of the tissue. في أي سؤال لحد هون؟ في أي سؤال؟ وصل لهون؟ يلا ما في أي سؤال؟ خليني أشوف الحضور الغياب. في عندي 54 طالب فقط. فريال، في أي سؤال يا فريال؟
يعطيك العافية دكتور، كل شيء واضح.
كل شيء واضح إن شاء الله. جنى، ماجد،
دكتور كل شيء واضح، يعطيك العافية.
محمد هي محمد وائل، محمد هايل، مهند محمود. فيش ولا سؤال؟
تمام
طيب
دكتور.
يعني ديروا بالكم الامتحان لوين؟ الامتحان لآخر المصل بس. كارديوفاسكولار مو داخل. طيب نوقف التسجيل. يلا يعطيكم العافية.